partnerships, smart growth, green economy, smart grid, common core state standards, councils of governments, etc. The creation of all of these programs will be laid at the feet of the Trilateral Commission, in the name of technocracy. First used publicly by W.H. Smythe in his 1919 article, Industrial Management. During that time in history, academics and professionals were fervently debating various aspects of the industrial and technological revolutions and their impact on society, economy and government structures. Socialism. The doctrines of Karl Marx are seen as the original basis for socialism as an economic and political model. Socialism eschews private property and the accumulation of wealth through state ownership of all productive resources and distribution based on to each according to his need. As with Marxism, socialism is described differently depending on the angle of observation, but the common denominator in all cases is a high level of social and economic control through state ownership and management with authoritarian control over production, distribution and consumption. Fabianism. The Fabian Society was formed in England in 1884. Transformation of society instead of a more radical approach. It was named after the Roman general Fabius Maximus, who used delaying tactics against the Carthaginian army led by the famous general, Hannibal. Over the decades, many famous individuals became members of the society, including H.G. Wells, Bernard Shaw, Virginia Woolf and Bertrand Russell. In forming the society and later founded the London School of Economics. The Fabian Society has had a profound influence in many nations and continents around the world, including Great Britain, the United States, Europe and Southern Africa. Is not coincidental that the most visible and manipulative modern agents of change, sustainable development, Agenda 21, global warming, the UN's green economy and the modern ecology movement, etc., all hold to the same underlying assumptions. These certificates could be spent for goods and services during the defined period but would expire just as a new allotment for the next period would be sent. Thus, the accumulation of private wealth would not be possible. Neither Scott nor Hubbard viewed private property or accumulated wealth as allowable in a technocracy. After all, it was capitalism that caused all the trouble in the first place, and the accumulation of wealth due to ownership of private property was the primary culprit. In a technocracy, then, all property, resources and the means of production would be held in a public trust for the benefit of all. They reasoned that since all needs for work, leisure and health were to be so abundantly met, people would willingly trade private property for the utopian dream. Technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population of this continent. For the first time in human history it will be done as a scientific, technical, engineering problem. Religion. However, the points of agreement are revealing. Like their American economic kin, they are against capitalism, against the profit system and against the gold standard. 39 These commonalities gave reason for more than casual communications between Scott and his German counterparts. Whatever technocracy represented in the 1930s and earlier, it was cleverly regurgitated in Zbigniew Brzezinski's book Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. This book was never a bestseller on any literary list, but it was the book that caught the eye and admiration of David Rockefeller. The Rockefeller dynasty, and David in particular, had always had a difficult time maintaining good public relations with the American public. Collectively, the Rockefellers represented the global-minded Eastern establishment that was bent on selling American sovereignty to international interests. In over 40 years since the founding of the Trilateral Commission, the historical record clearly testifies to its success. The energy smart grid that have resulted from trilateral interactions testify to their ideological grounding in historic technocracy. Trilateral basics. The idea to create the Trilateral Commission was first informally presented to people at the elitist Bilderberg Group meeting in Europe in 1972, by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. They had flown there together for just that purpose, and because they were encouraged by so many of their elitist brethren, they returned to the U.S. A government, an unseen government, different from the visible government in Washington. The inclusion of European and Japanese members indicated a global government rather than a national government. When I speak of the present international system I am referring to relations in specific fields, most of all among the Atlantic countries, commercial, military, mutual security relations, involving the International Monetary Fund, NATO etc. U.S. Constitution. Authority is granted to Congress to regulate commerce with foreign nations. An effective end run around this insurmountable obstacle would be to convince Congress to voluntarily turn over this power to the President. Track for himself in the Trade Act of 2002, just in time to negotiate the Central American Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA, and ensure its passage in 2005. These trade bamboozles didn't stand a ghost of a chance to be passed without it, and the global elite knew it. Fast Track was created as a very specific legislative tool to accomplish a very specific executive task, namely, to fast-track the creation of the new international economic order envisioned by the Trilateral Commission in 1973. Of course, this only represents the auto industry, but the same effect has been seen in many other industries as well. Buchanan correctly noted that NAFTA was never just a trade deal. Act to enable U.S. corporations to dump their American workers and move their factories to Mexico. Indeed, this is the very spirit of all outsourcing of U.S. jobs and manufacturing facilities to overseas locations. It is clear that the executive branch of the U.S. was literally hijacked in 1976 by members of the Trilateral Commission, upon the election of President Jimmy Carter and Vice President Walter Mondale. This near-absolute domination, especially in the areas of trade, banking, economics and foreign policy, has continued unchallenged and unabated to the present. The philosophical underpinnings of the Trilateral Commission have the appearance of being pro-Marxist and pro-socialist, but only as a stepping stone leading to Brzezinski's technotronic, or technocratic, society. They are solidly set against the concept of the nation-state and in particular, the Constitution of the United States. International economic order that will be governed by an unelected global elite with their self-created legal framework. On April 23, 1993, the official Agenda 21 300-page, 40-chapter book was published, and it was widely heralded by the rest of the world. In the U.S., it was mostly a non-event. The U.S. As an official policy document, there would have been a significant backlash, if not outright rebellion. If you have ever wondered why local officials don't know what you are talking about when you mention Agenda 21 or LA 21, now you know why. The language was changed. Instead, ask them what they know about comprehensive planning, growth management or smart growth and you will have a lengthy conversation. States, and some 22,000 have been targeted for removal. There is nothing logical about dam removal. Hydroelectric power is the cheapest and most efficient source of energy available where it is possible. Economic activity surrounding lakes and reservoirs includes marinas, campgrounds, restaurants, housing developments, recreation facilities, etc., all of which would be wiped out if the water disappears. Property rights. Private property is eschewed, calling for government control of rights and resources that will be licensed in certain situations. Property rights can still be allocated to environmental public goods, but in this case they should be restricted to usufructual or user rights. Why the federal government is rushing to lock up as much as 50% of all the available land in the United States. Society is built on three legs: economics, politics and religion. Dustbin of history has plenty of examples of societies that failed when division set in. As healthcare, Obamacare, control over water, Army Corps of Engineers, land, councils of governments, agricultural practices, Bureau of Land Management, education, Common Core, energy, Department of Energy, smart grid, transportation, metropolitan planning organizations, emergency management, FEMA, and so on. Public-private partnerships for urban development in the United States. Note that the original federal urban renewal legislation in 1949 provided for locally operated redevelopment authorities, public agencies, to acquire land using powers of eminent domain and then to sell the land at a reduced price to private corporations for development. The 1930s Technocracy study course had much to say about education, and it pointedly explains why modern technocrats have undertaken the systemization of education in America under such programs as No Child Left Behind and more recently, Common Core. However, humans are not merely machines, and neither is society. They are not to be valued only by what they produce or how efficiently they produce it. Conditioned from cradle to grave. I have purposely used the term outcome-based to emphasize where this modern term used in educational circles came from. Outcome-based society demands an outcome-based educational system. However, it is not really education at all. All data collected from K1 through K12 will be associated with the student for life, and since it is collected during assessments by largely unqualified personnel, the student will be forever tainted by the collector's opinions. Individual as well as society as a whole, there are no provisions to correct or appeal data wrongly entered or data based on bad opinions. To understand what the God of science has to say today, you must inquire of the priest of science, and you must decide to take his teachings by faith, even if there is empirical evidence to the contrary. Can see the early influence of St. Simon's Brotherhood of Man ruled by a technological elite. In the second instance, attention must be given to the phrase, alter the course of human evolution because it introduces for the first time the concept of transhumanism which will be explored shortly in the chapter Transforming Humanity. To say that Aspen Institute is a captive audience for trilateral commission hegemony is an understatement. Taught humanism to tens of thousands of top corporate executives from all over the world is staggering. In 1992, Maurice Strong, a Canadian billionaire, was Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development that sponsored and conducted the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro that produced the official Agenda 21 document on sustainable development. In his opening statement, he declared, "It is, therefore, of the highest importance that all governments commit themselves to translate the decisions they take collectively here to national policies and practices required to give effect to them, particularly implementation of Agenda 21.143. Strong and Gorbachev were directors. 2 years later in 1994, Strong and Gorbachev created the Earth Charter which many viewed as a prototype constitution for the New World Order. Supported by Yuri. Strong himself stated, the real goal of the Earth Charter is that it will in fact become like the 10 Commandments. 145 Gorbachev was interviewed in 1996 and said, Cosmos is my God. Nature is my God. The siren call of globalization is self-regulation of industries and trade. The banking industry in New York wants to be self-regulated. The securities industry wants to be self-regulated. The oil industry wants to be self-regulated. The World Trade Organization, WTO, is an expression of self-regulation. Lex Mercatoria, meaning merchant law. Historically, merchant law was used by merchants, mostly shipping, during the medieval period to settle disputes, and courtrooms were set up along trade routes to hear cases. Merchants made their own laws and rules according to trade customs and best practices, both of which were constantly changing according to the mood of the trade industry. Your personal property and local community, you will be involuntarily squeezed until you voluntarily comply. There is no legal process available to defend yourself, your property, or your rights. There is no appeal from the damage done to your rights or property. Another example of reflexive law revealing itself is seen in an article in the New York Times, Obama pursuing climate accord in lieu of treaty. The article states that the negotiators are meeting with diplomats from other countries to broker a deal to commit some of the world's largest economies to enact laws to reduce their carbon pollution. 167 The self-decided social norm is that carbon pollution is bad and that society must cut back or risk running out of resources altogether. Furthermore, meters are able to communicate with electrical devices within the residence in order to gather consumption data and to control certain devices directly without consumer intervention. IPv6 is large enough to assign a unique address to every person, computer, and digital device known to exist, and barely break a sweat. Giving a unique address to your digital smart meter, plus every digital device in your home is minuscule. However, if all of your appliances have unique and cataloged IPv6 addresses, then all washing machines, for instance, could be accessed as a class of devices with a universal command to turn them on or off or limit their usage to certain times of the day. With IoT, accessing remote resources via class, type, group, etc., is a technocrat's nirvana. Usage and consumption policies can then be set at the top level and executed automatically across the entire population of a region, country, or even the entire world. The GFA controller developed by Pacific Northwest National Laboratory is a small circuit board built into household appliances that reduces stress on the power grid by continually monitoring fluctuations in available power, climbing to a record 14.3 cents in June. To add insult to injury, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, simultaneously called for higher energy prices in order to fight climate change. The consumer is obviously not in view here. Talk of lower utility costs refers to the utility companies. Unusable. The deathly economic state of today's world is a direct reflection of the sum of its sick and dying currencies, but this could soon change. To position a new carbon currency as the ultimate solution to global calls for poverty reduction, population control, environmental control, global warming, energy allocation and blanket distribution of economic wealth. Unfortunately for individual people living in this new system, it will also require authoritarian and centralized control over all aspects of life, from cradle to grave. What is carbon currency and how does it work? In a nutshell, carbon currency will be based on the regular allocation of available energy to the people of the world. If not used within a period of time, the currency will expire, like monthly minutes on your cell phone plan, so that the same people can receive a new allocation based on new energy production quotas for the next period. Because the energy supply chain is already dominated by the global elite, setting energy production quotas will limit the amount of carbon currency in circulation at any one time. It will also naturally limit manufacturing, food production and people movement. Are individually registered to each citizen and B, money persists while certificates expire. The latter facet would greatly hinder, if not altogether prevent, the accumulation of wealth and property. Imagine a country where carbon becomes a new currency. We carry bank cards that store both pounds and carbon points. When we buy electricity, gas and fuel, we use our carbon points, as well as pounds. It would involve people being issued with a unique number which they would hand over when purchasing products that contribute to their carbon footprint, such as fuel, airline tickets and electricity. Statement would be sent out each month to help people keep track of what they are using. If their carbon account hits zero, they would have to pay to get more credits. The certificate will be issued directly to the individual. It is non-transferable and non-negotiable, therefore, it cannot be stolen, lost, loaned, borrowed, or given away. It is non-cumulative, therefore, it cannot be saved, and it does not accrue or bear interest. It need not be spent but loses its validity after a designated time period. It is now possible to use a plastic card similar to today's credit card embedded with a microchip, as described in this booklet. Since the same information would be provided in whatever forms best suits the latest technology, however, the concept of an energy distribution card is what is explained here. Provide the open door to all this profit? Currently leading the pack are JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. Do with carbon what they've done before, design and market derivatives contracts that will help client companies hedge their price risk over the long term. Ready to sell carbon-related financial products to outside investors. Could easily be managed on a single computer. Of course, a currency is merely a means to an end. Whoever controls the currency would also